Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
About 14 years ago, I met my partner through mutual friends. He'd just gone through a nasty divorce and bankruptcy that left him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a small disability check. His ex-wife took half of even that pittance as part of their separation agreement. Meanwhile, I had built up a pretty decent life for myself, owned my house outright, ran a successful small business, and enjoyed my independence. When he lost his rental place because he couldn't afford it anymore, I offered to let him stay with me temporarily. That temporary arrangement turned into 10 years together. He was genuinely a good guy, handy around the house, great sense of humor, got along with all the neighbors. He kept the place clean and never made me feel like I was supporting a deadbeat. We had an understanding that what was mine stayed mine and what was his stayed his. Simple and clean. The only dark cloud in his life was his relationship with his two adult children. His daughter was 28 and his son was 35, but they treated him like garbage. They never visited, rarely answered his calls, and when they did pick up, they'd brush him off or hang up on him. I watched him try to connect with them for years, and it broke my heart. But what could I do? They'd been treating him this way long before I came into the picture. One evening, everything changed. He'd been having heart problems for a while, and that night his heart just gave out. He was only 58. I was devastated. We'd been planning to take a trip together the following month, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. Less than 12 hours after he died, while I was still trying to wrap my head around losing him, his daughter called me. She didn't even bother with condolences or asking how I was doing. Instead, she immediately demanded to know about her father's life insurance and who the beneficiary was. She told me that according to her mother's divorce papers, her dad was supposed to keep life insurance with her and her brother as beneficiaries, and she needed to know how to claim it. For a split second, I thought maybe she was worried about me being able to afford the funeral costs. How naive I was. I told her I didn't think he had any life insurance policy with them as beneficiaries. She seemed shocked and asked what I meant by that. I explained that he had canceled that policy years ago when she turned 18 because he couldn't afford the premiums on his disability income. The line went quiet for a moment, then she hung up. Later that same day, she called back. This time she told me she'd already been to see a lawyer. She asked if her dad had a will, but it was clear she already knew the answer. When I asked how she could possibly know that so soon, and expressed disbelief that she'd already consulted a lawyer just one day after he died, she coldly explained that since there was no will, she was his next of kin. That meant she was in charge of burial arrangements, and she would inherit everything he owned, including his car and anything else of his in my house. This woman hadn't spoken to her father in months, and now she was swooping in like a vulture. I tried to tell her that I understood she was grieving, but asked if we could please discuss this later because I was trying to process that he was gone. She dismissed my feelings completely and said there was nothing to process. She then told me that she needed to do a walkthrough of my house to make sure I hadn't hidden anything that belonged to them, and demanded the car keys immediately. That's when I'd had enough. I told her flat out that she would not be doing a walkthrough of my house. When she asked what I meant, I repeated myself clearly. If she wanted his belongings, she could arrange for proper movers to collect them, but she would not be setting foot in my home. She was furious. She started yelling about how I was stealing from them and how her lawyer would force me to cooperate. Then she hung up. Over the next few days, I waited to hear about funeral arrangements. Nothing. I finally called her back and asked when the funeral was because I wanted to pay my respects. She coldly told me that the funeral was for family only, for special people, and that I wasn't invited. She wouldn't even tell me which funeral home they'd chosen. I later found out through his best friend that they'd held it 3 towns away and never put an obituary in the paper. But she kept calling about the car and his belongings. She would tell me that her lawyer said I had to give them the car immediately, and they wanted all his stuff out of my house. I told her that was fine, but I needed to see legal documentation that the car was properly transferred to their names and insured because I didn't want to be liable if something happened after they drove it away. She insisted they would handle the paperwork after they got the car. I explained that wasn't how this worked, and since they wanted all his belongings, they'd need to hire proper movers because I had just had my driveway repaved and wouldn't have random people with pickup trucks damaging it. She said they just wanted the car first and would come back for the rest later. I knew better than that. Once they got the car, they'd disappear and leave me stuck with disposing of everything else at my own expense. And there was a lot of everything else. See, my partner was a hoarder, in the truest sense of the word. He collected broken electronics, old tools, scrap metal, and machine parts. His man cave in my garage was packed with 4 ancient televisions, 6 massive toolboxes, 8 computers, 2 broken barbecue grills, a floor-standing drill press, a bandsaw he'd found at the dump, 6 stereo components that didn't work, and 198 boxes of metal parts from various machines, trucks, cars, bulldozers, and buses. The crown jewel of his collection was a 60-year-old 5-ton metal lathe that probably belonged in a museum. That's when inspiration struck. I spent 2 weeks carefully arranging everything. First, I moved his car to the very back of my 2-car garage. Then I systematically stacked all 198 boxes of metal parts in front of it. The toolboxes went next, then the broken electronics, then the drill press, and finally the massive lathe right in front of the garage door. I packed that garage from floor to ceiling, making it physically impossible to remove the car without moving everything else first. When I was done, I took a picture of the garage with the doors open. You could just barely see the roof of the car peeking over the mountain of junk. Within days, their lawyer was calling my lawyer, screaming that I was refusing to cooperate and demanding the car be released immediately. He even accused me of selling the car. My lawyer called me and told me about the accusations. He said they were claiming I was stealing and even suggesting I might have sold the car. I told him that was ridiculous, and that the car was right there in the garage. When he said he was looking at the photo I'd sent and didn't see a car, I told him to look carefully at the back because you could see just a bit of the roof behind all those boxes. My lawyer burst out laughing and told me it was brilliant. He explained that I wasn't refusing to give them the car at all, I was just requiring them to take all his belongings. The entitled daughter and her brother had no choice. They hired a moving and storage company to empty the garage. It took 4 men and a special hydraulic lift to remove the 5-ton lathe. The crew worked all day just to clear a path to the car. The moving company supervisor asked where they were taking all the stuff. She told him to the storage unit they had rented. He looked around at the massive pile of junk and told her that this wasn't going to fit in 1 unit, and they would need at least 3 or 4 units for all this stuff. I watched from my kitchen window as box after box of useless scrap metal and broken machinery was loaded onto trucks. The final tally, according to his best friend who heard it, was $14,000 for the movers, plus whatever they ended up paying for multiple storage units to house all that junk. Remember how she cut me out of the funeral and wouldn't even tell me where it was? Well, I had actually taken out a life insurance policy on my partner and had been paying the premiums myself. I planned to use that money to give him a nice funeral. Since they decided to exclude me from his final goodbye, I used the insurance money to pay off my mortgage instead. It would have cost them absolutely nothing to treat me with basic human decency. I'd taken care of their father for 10 years, asked for nothing in return, and never interfered in their family drama. All they had to do was be civil to me during the worst week of my life. Instead, their greed and cruelty cost them $14,000 for the privilege of storing a garage full of worthless junk that they probably ended up paying storage fees on for months before finally admitting it was all garbage. First, let me give you some background on how I ended up witnessing this mess. I moved to this quiet neighborhood about 2 years ago after my divorce. I needed a fresh start somewhere peaceful, and this seemed like the perfect place. The houses are close enough that you know your neighbors, but far enough apart that you still have privacy. I work from home, so I'm around most of the time and tend to notice what goes on in the area. My next door neighbors are this lovely couple who have the sweetest dog. She's a Rottweiler named Bella, and despite what some people think about the breed, she's incredibly gentle and well trained. A few weeks ago, she gave birth to the most adorable litter of puppies you've ever seen. The whole neighborhood was excited about these little furballs, and everyone would stop by to peek over the fence and coo at them. But there's this one neighbor who lives a few houses down. Let's call her Karen because, well, she's the definition of one. She's one of those entitled types who always expects things to go her way and throws tantrums when they don't. From the moment she heard about Bella's pregnancy, she'd been pressuring my neighbors to give her one of the puppies for her kids. But my neighbors aren't the type to just hand out animals to anyone, especially not to Karen and her badly behaved children. A few weeks before this whole incident went down, I was chatting with my neighbor over the fence one sunny afternoon. We were talking about how cute Bella's puppies were going to be when they arrived. That's when Karen decided to insert herself into our conversation. Karen strolled over with a fake smile on her face and told my neighbor how exciting it was that her dog was having puppies. She then asked if my neighbor could give one of the puppies to her kids, claiming they had been begging for a dog and that these puppies would be perfect for them. My neighbor looked uncomfortable but tried to be polite about it. She told Karen that while they were happy about the puppies, they were planning to find good homes for them with responsible and caring families. Now, my neighbor is honestly the nicest lady I've ever met, but she can also be pretty direct when she needs to be. Karen's fake smile started to slip a little when she insisted it was just one puppy and that her kids would take great care of it. She added that it wasn't like my neighbor needed so many puppies around anyway. My neighbor replied that they took their responsibility as pet owners very seriously and wanted to ensure that each puppy went to a loving home where they would be well cared for. Karen huffed and crossed her arms like a toddler having a meltdown. She said she didn't see why my neighbor was being so difficult about it, pointing out that with Bella and all the puppies coming, one wouldn't make a difference. My neighbor explained that every puppy made a difference and that they were all precious lives deserving the best care possible. Karen then snapped that her kids really wanted one and accused my neighbor of being selfish. My neighbor stayed calm, which honestly impressed me because I would have lost it by then. She apologized to Karen but explained that it wasn't about being selfish but about wanting what was best for the puppies and finding loving, responsible homes for each of them. Karen stomped away like an angry child. After that encounter, she tried a couple more times to pressure my neighbors into giving her a puppy, but each time she got the same response. I could tell Karen didn't understand what it actually means to be a responsible pet owner. She seemed more interested in getting what she wanted rather than thinking about what would be best for the puppies. Dogs need love, proper training, and consistent care, and honestly, I had serious doubts about whether Karen could provide any of that. Now let's get to the main event that happened last week. One night after Bella had given birth to her adorable little puppies, Karen apparently decided to take matters into her own hands. She dressed in all black like some sort of ridiculous puppy-stealing ninja and snuck into my neighbor's yard. Can you believe the audacity? She actually broke into their house thinking nobody would notice one of the puppies missing. Here's where things get really interesting. Bella might be sweet and gentle most of the time, but she's also a fiercely protective mama. The moment Karen got anywhere near those puppies, Bella's maternal instincts kicked into high gear. She went into full guard dog mode and charged straight at Karen, barking and growling with everything she had. It was like watching an action movie unfold in real life. Karen started screaming and wailing when Bella went after her, biting down and holding her to the ground. It was the ultimate showdown between a protective mother and an entitled intruder who thought she could just waltz in and steal a puppy. I was just relaxing in my living room when I heard all the commotion outside. Curious and obviously concerned, I rushed to my window to see what was happening. Let me tell you, I was not prepared for the spectacle I witnessed. There was Karen, flat on the ground in my neighbor's yard, wrestling with an angry Rottweiler. It looked like she had tried to run when Bella first attacked her inside the house, but Bella had caught up to her and pinned her down on the lawn. It was almost comical, but I knew this was serious business. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I mean, regardless of what Karen was doing there, I couldn't just watch someone get mauled by a dog without calling for help. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, I saw my neighbors rushing down their stairs to see what was happening. They looked absolutely panicked and confused. I opened my front door and yelled over to them that their dog was attacking someone in their yard. They rushed outside just when the police sirens started wailing in the distance. The cops arrived within minutes, thank God. They managed to get Bella away from Karen, who was still lying on the ground, screaming and carrying on like she was the victim in all this. The police started questioning my neighbors and me, trying to piece together what had led to this bizarre situation. They wanted to know if anyone had seen what caused Bella to attack Karen in the first place. I told them they could check my security cameras, which cover the side of my neighbor's house where Karen had broken in. I had installed them after a few break-ins in the area last year, and boy was I glad I had them now. Meanwhile, Karen was trying her hardest to play the innocent victim, telling the police that Bella had attacked her completely unprovoked. Give me a break. We all knew exactly what she had been up to, and thankfully the police could see right through her ridiculous lies, because she had been stupid enough to break in from the side that my cameras were covering. The puppies were safe and sound inside the house, all cuddled up in their cozy little area. The police called animal control just to make sure everything was handled properly, but since we had already gotten Bella under control, they weren't really needed. When things started to calm down, my neighbors explained to the police about all the times Karen had been harassing them to give her a puppy. They showed the officers the text messages and voicemails they had received where she had practically begged and then demanded one of the puppies. I overheard Karen talking to the police, and what she said absolutely floored me. She told them that since my neighbors didn't want to give her a puppy, she thought she'd just take one for her kids. She reasoned that they had so many puppies that they wouldn't even notice one missing. What kind of entitled mindset is that? You can't just steal someone's pet because they refused to give you what you wanted. That's not how the world works. The cops didn't buy her pathetic excuses for even a second. They handcuffed her right there on the spot, and she had to be taken away in an ambulance because Bella had given her some pretty nasty bites. It was ironically hilarious. Who breaks into someone's house to steal a puppy and expects to walk away without any payback? My neighbors were obviously shaken up by the whole ordeal, but they were relieved that Bella had protected her babies and that the police were taking their side. They thanked me for calling 911 and being a good neighbor, which honestly was just a decent thing to do. We all look out for each other around here. In the end, Karen got exactly what she deserved. She was charged with breaking and entering, attempted theft, and several other crimes. Her pathetic attempt to flip the case by claiming it was an unprovoked dog attack was quickly thrown out by the court. The evidence from my security cameras spoke for itself, and it was crystal clear that Bella was just protecting her family from an intruder. The whole neighborhood was buzzing about this incident for weeks afterward. Everyone was relieved that Bella and her precious puppies were safe and that Karen had been caught red-handed trying to steal from a family. Bella became even more of a local celebrity than she already was. Everyone in the neighborhood admired her for being such a brave and loyal protector. People would stop by to say hello to her and bring her treats. She became like our neighborhood's unofficial mascot, and we all loved her even more. The judge ended up sentencing Karen to 3 years in prison. Maybe those 3 years behind bars will finally knock some sense into her thick skull and teach her that the world doesn't revolve around her wants and demands. Though knowing Karen, I somehow doubt it. I was studying computer science and working part-time at a local coffee shop to pay for my tiny studio apartment. Most of my free time was spent coding or reading mystery novels. I wasn't antisocial, just picky about who I let into my circle. That changed when I met her in the laundry room of our apartment building. She was struggling with an overflowing washing machine, soap suds everywhere, looking defeated. I helped her clean up the mess and showed her the trick to the old machine. She was grateful and introduced herself as my neighbor from 2 floors up. She was everything I wasn't: loud, spontaneous, and magnetic. Within a week, she had convinced me to join her friend group for weekend adventures around the city. Before I knew it, I was trying exotic foods, going to underground art shows, and actually having a social life for the first time since moving here. For about 6 months, things were great. We had this routine where we'd grab coffee every Tuesday morning before work and catch up on everything. She'd tell me about her latest dating disasters, and I'd listen and offer what little relationship advice I could. I genuinely enjoyed our friendship, even though we were complete opposites. Then she met him at some networking event for her marketing job. From the moment she started talking about him, I could tell something was off. She described him as this incredibly successful businessman who owned multiple properties around the city. She kept showing me photos of expensive restaurants he'd taken her to and fancy gifts he'd bought her after just a few dates. My first red flag was when she mentioned he'd already asked her to delete her dating apps after their third date. She laughed it off as romantic, but it made my stomach turn. I'd seen enough controlling behavior growing up with my dad to recognize the warning signs. Over the next month, our Tuesday coffee dates became sporadic. She'd cancel last minute with vague excuses. I'd text her asking if we were still meeting for coffee, and she'd respond apologetically saying she couldn't make it because he'd surprised her with a spa day or some other last-minute plan. The few times we did meet, she seemed different, more anxious, constantly checking her phone. When I asked about it, she brushed it off by saying he'd just like to stay in touch throughout the day and that she thought it was sweet. But I could see the stress in her eyes every time her phone buzzed. Things came to a head about 2 months into their relationship. I was coming home from work late one evening when I saw her sitting on the steps outside our building, crying. I sat down next to her and waited for her to talk. She told me she didn't know what to do anymore. When I asked what happened, she explained that he had gone through her phone that day. He'd found our text messages and accused her of having feelings for me. He'd made her block me on everything. I told her that wasn't okay and asked if she knew that. She said she did, but then defended him by saying he was just protective because he loved her so much. She wondered aloud if maybe he had a point and if she relied on our friendship too much. I felt sick listening to her defend him. This was textbook manipulation, and she was falling for it completely. I tried to explain that she deserved someone who trusted her and that this wasn't love but control. She asked what if he was right and what if she was the problem. That's when I knew I had to do something. I'd watched my mom go through the same cycle with my dad for years before she finally left. I wasn't going to sit back and watch my friend disappear into the same trap. I remembered a classmate from college who'd become a private investigator. We'd worked together on a few programming projects, and he owed me a favor for helping him pass our database management class. I reached out to him and explained the situation. He told me he couldn't just spy on someone because I didn't like them. But he said if I suspected the guy was involved in illegal activities or if my friend was in danger, that would be different. I told him she was definitely in danger and that something told me a guy this controlling had other secrets. It took some convincing, but he agreed to do some background research. What he found was worse than I'd imagined. The guy had a history of domestic violence charges that had been dropped when his previous girlfriends suddenly stopped cooperating with prosecutors. He was also involved in some shady real estate deals that were being investigated for fraud. I compiled everything into a folder and left it outside her apartment door with a note explaining that I was worried about her safety. I didn't sign it, hoping she'd think it came from someone else. 3 days later, she showed up at my door, the folder in her hand. She asked if this was me. I told her I was worried about her and pointed out that she'd been isolating herself from everyone who cared about her. She seemed shocked that I'd had him investigated and asked if I knew how crazy that sounded. I asked if she'd read what was in the folder and told her that he was dangerous. She stared at me for a long moment, then sank into my couch. She told me she'd confronted him about the domestic violence arrests. According to her, he'd said his exes were vindictive and made false reports. But she said that the way he said it and something in his eyes had scared her. I asked what she was going to do. She said she thought she needed to end things but was scared of how he'd react. We spent the next hour making a plan. She would break up with him in a public place and stay with a friend for a few days. I offered to let her crash at my place, but she said it would be better if he didn't know where she was. The breakup didn't go well. According to her, he caused a scene at the restaurant, accusing her of cheating and threatening to destroy her reputation around the city. But she stuck to her guns and ended things. A week later, I started getting strange phone calls in the middle of the night. Heavy breathing, then a hang up. Then I noticed the same car parked across from my building several days in a row. When I mentioned it to her, her face went pale. She told me he knew it was me. Apparently, he'd hired some tech guy to recover deleted messages from her phone and had seen our conversation about the investigation. The harassment escalated quickly. I'd come home to find my apartment door slightly ajar, though nothing was ever taken. Someone slashed my bike tires twice. I started getting emails with photos of me walking to work, with messages saying things like, "I'm watching you and you ruined my life. Now I'll ruin yours." I went to the police, but they said, without concrete proof, it was him, there wasn't much they could do. The photos were taken from public spaces and anyone could have sent anonymous emails. That's when I decided to fight back. I called my investigator friend again. I told him I needed his help because the guy was stalking me now. He said now we were talking about something he could actually help with since stalking was a crime. For 2 weeks, we documented everything. Hidden cameras captured him following me home from work. We recorded the harassing phone calls. My friend even posed as a potential client to get him talking about teaching people lessons when they interfered with his business. The evidence was overwhelming. When we presented it to the police, they finally took action. He was arrested on charges of stalking, harassment, and making terroristic threats. The day of his arraignment, I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched as he was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. When his eyes found mine, he mouthed, "This isn't over." But his lawyer quickly grabbed his arm and whispered something in his ear that made him face forward. He ended up pleading guilty to avoid a lengthy trial. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in prison and a 5-year restraining order against both me and my friend. Part of his plea deal required him to pay restitution for the damage to my property and my therapy costs. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.